The Oregon forests are known for their silence, their blanket-like density, and their ability to hide traces of human presence. In August of 2015, 17-year-old Luke Miller disappeared without a trace. He was last seen on a trail near North Creek, and only a broken phone was found. The search lasted for weeks, but the trail was cut off and the case was written off as an accident. 9 years passed before the forest returned the answer. The answer was waiting inside an old rusty refrigerator left outside an abandoned hut. It was with this discovery that a new investigation began, and it shattered the town's perception of its own safety. Oregon, August 2015. On a warm morning, 17-year-old Luke Miller leaves his home on the outskirts of Cleveland, Lynn County for the last time. His neighbors are used to seeing the boy with a camera around his neck, as photography has been his passion since childhood. He took pictures of everything from the clouds hanging over the Cascade Mountains to the details of old wooden fences. That summer, the Miller family had a lot of arguments. His parents insisted that Luke go to a technical college in Salem after high school, get a practical trade, and get on his feet. He himself dreamed of art. He wanted to study cinematography or photography in Portland. On the morning of August 22nd, the argument flared up again. His father reminded him of the application deadline, and his mother asked him to be realistic. Luke, slamming the door, said, "I'm going to shoot. Leave me alone for once." At 10:20, he wrote in a group chat with his friends, "I'm going to the old logging road near the northern stream. The sunrise there will be bombastic today." A few minutes later, one of his neighbors saw him with a backpack and a tripod in his hands. The young man was heading toward the forest. This was the last confirmed evidence of his movement. Around 11 o'clock, Luke called his best friend, Ethan Price. The conversation lasted only a minute, but left the most mysterious detail in the whole case. In the background, a short exclamation could be heard, like a cheerful shout, "Hey, wait, where are you going?" Luke laughed and suddenly cut the conversation short. Ethan later claimed that the guy had definitely seen someone and hurried over. Who exactly remained unknown. After that, the tracks disappeared. At 2:30 in the afternoon, heavy storm clouds gathered over the forest. It began to rain, which lasted until the evening. When the boy didn't return home at 9 o'clock, his parents first thought he was waiting out the weather in a shelter, but around 11 at night, his mother called the sheriff's department. The officer on duty recorded the message. 17-year-old Luke Miller has not returned from a walk. He last left in the direction of the old logging road. His parents described his clothes: gray jeans, a black t-shirt, a light jacket, and sneakers. He was carrying a Canon camera with a tripod, a small backpack, and a smartphone. When Luke didn't return home at 9 p.m., his parents first hoped that he was waiting out the storm in a shelter. But the storm subsided, and their son did not appear. Around 11 at night, the mother called the sheriff's department. The officer on duty logged the missing persons report and passed it on to Sergeant Martha Dawson. In her report, she wrote down, 17-year-old male last seen on old logging road near North Creek. The circumstances of the disappearance are unclear. We need to respond immediately. And so began a story that for many years would become one of Oregon's most mysterious cases. On the morning of August 23, 2015, a large-scale search operation began in Lynn County. More than 40 volunteers, several canine teams, and a helicopter crew with a thermal camera took part. The area of the old logging road where Luke Miller was headed was difficult. Dense undergrowth, trails washed out after a rainstorm, and numerous branches leading to the depths of the mountain slopes. The dogs were let loose from the Miller's house. They confidently picked up the trail and led the group to a dirt road to the North Creek. However, after a few hundred meters, the scent stopped. The animals were confused, going one way and then turning sharply. It was as if the trail had disappeared into thin air. This seemed strange to Sergeant Martha Dawson. She wrote in her field notebook, The dogs are losing direction. It looks like something has broken the scent chain. The next day, the search continued from the air. The helicopter flew around the creek's vicinity, trying to capture heat spots among the thickets. But the camera showed nothing but deer and a few fishermen's tents. Meanwhile, one of the groups found a damaged smartphone near the bed of the northern stream. It was lying in the mud, the screen was broken, and the case was scratched. Experts later determined that the device had been broken by impact, as if it had been dropped or knocked out of their hands. This was the first and only material evidence. The third day of searching yielded no results. The volunteers combed ravine after ravine, checked abandoned hunting shelters, and went down to the waterfalls. Dawson personally walked the old road where the trail was last recorded. She noticed tire tracks on the damp ground. The tread was distinctive, similar to that of pickup trucks or old Jeeps. But this clue turned out to be doubtful. The forest was full of vehicles of hunters, fishermen, and foresters. A week passed. Every day we combed new sectors, but we didn't find a single thing that would have belonged to the boy. There was no backpack, no camera, no clothes. They also failed to find any witnesses who saw him after 11 o'clock that day. Only a broken phone and a fragmentary phone conversation with Ethan remained in the hands of the investigators. Dawson felt that something didn't add up. She recalled the words of the guy on the phone. "Hey, wait, where are you going?" And realized that behind this phrase was a meeting that no one knew about. In her report, she emphasized, "The version of accidental loss does not explain the screaming on the phone or the absence of footprints after the creek." But the official position of the management was different. A month passed. The search was gradually curtailed. The volunteers left, and the dog handlers returned to other matters. At a press conference on September 22nd, the county sheriff announced, "All efforts have been exhausted. The probable cause is an accident. The boy got lost, fell into a stream, and his body was carried away by the current." The case was reclassified as cold. For the Miller family, this version sounded like a verdict without a body. They continued to keep a photo of Luke with a camera in his hands on the living room table, but their faith in the official findings was melting away. And Sergeant Dawson, left with a notebook and a few photos of the damaged smartphone, was sure that the forest hid more than it seemed. The forest trap had closed, no evidence, no eyewitnesses, just the feeling that someone had cut the thread on purpose. The summer of 2024 was hot, even for Oregon. On July 27th, a group of high school students from the small town of Sweet Home set out on a 3-day bicycle trip along an old logging road. The 5 teenagers, 2 girls and 3 boys, were heading deep into the Cascade Mountains, hoping to spend the night near North Creek. Around 3 in the afternoon, they turned off the road and came across an abandoned hut with a cracked roof. The building stood among dense blackberry bushes and looked as if it had not been opened for decades. Nearby, in the grass, half buried in the ground, an old 70s refrigerator was darkening. Massive, with peeling enamel, its doors glistening strangely in the sun. At first, the kids joked about it. A field freezer or someone's beer stash. But one of the boys came closer and pulled the handle. The door did not give way. Only after several attempts did they see that the seam along the edge of the door was completely welded with metal. It looked unnatural. Curiosity overcame caution. The 2 boys picked up the edge with a branch, trying to loosen the door at least a little. The metal cracked in the corner, and a pungent rotting smell immediately escaped into the air. The teenagers recoiled. The girls screamed, demanding that it stop. The boys froze, realizing that there could be something much worse than garbage. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of them called his father, gave him the coordinates, and asked him to call the police immediately. Less than an hour later, a patrolman from the Lynn County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene. The refrigerator was immediately surrounded by yellow tape, and the teenagers were sent away. 18 o'clock. A group of forensic experts arrived at the cabin. The rescuers used tools to cut the weld around the perimeter of the door. When the metal door finally came off, even the experienced officers could not contain their reactions. Inside was a human skeleton. The bones were locked in an unnatural position, and the hands were hugging an object that was immediately recognized as an old Canon camera. The remains of jeans and a t-shirt were still on the bones. In the back pocket of the jeans was a leather wallet. Inside was an identification card in the name of Luke Miller, a 17-year-old teenager who disappeared 9 years ago. The police recorded every detail. The camera was carefully removed, along with the memory card, which surprisingly survived. The refrigerator was later transported to the base for a full examination. The news spread through the town in a few hours. For most of the residents, Luke's name was already a legend, part of the old forest secret. And now this mystery suddenly came to life, forcing the community to face fear once again. For 9 years, the boy had not only been missing, he had been walled up alive in an iron box, left to die alone. Sergeant Martha Dawson, who had been working on the case since 2015, received the call at 7 o'clock in the evening. She stopped for a few seconds, holding the phone. The name she had read over and over again in the cold file suddenly came to life again. The discovery in the old refrigerator was a turning point. The story, which had been almost forgotten, was revealed with renewed vigor. There were examinations, interrogations, and questions that had been nagging at us from the very beginning. Who was standing next to Luke in the forest 9 years ago? And whose hand welded the door of the deadly trap shut? The discovery of the refrigerator containing Luke Miller's skeletal remains shook the entirety of Lynn County. The very next day, July 28, 2024, the discovery was transported to the Salem Forensic Laboratory. Experts worked with extreme caution, documenting every detail. The skeletal bones were relatively well preserved due to the tightness of the refrigerator. The narrow metal space was kept humid, preventing animals or insects from getting inside. Medical examiner Dr. Grayson wrote in his first report, "The cause of death is a combination of dehydration and suffocation. Signs indicate that the juvenile remained alive for some time after being buried. Clear marks from a coarse rope were found on the neck vertebrae and wrist bones. This confirmed it. Luke was first tied up and then placed inside. Particular attention was paid to the Canon camera that the skeleton was clutching. The case was damaged, but the memory card survived. After recovering the data, the technicians received more than 3 dozen pictures taken on the day of the disappearance. The first shots were typical of the young photographer: trees, moss, and the glare of a stream. But the last series of pictures changed the course of the investigation. The penultimate photo shows a blurred fragment of the path and the shadow of another person. And the final shot was the key: a part of a car with a distinctive grille, a metal emblem, and a hand in a camouflage glove stretched out right up to the lens. Sergeant Martha Dawson, who led the search 9 years ago, received this image on her desk. She was due to retire in a few months, but now the case is back on her mind. "We have a witness who left the evidence with his own hands," she told her colleagues as she flipped through the photo printouts. The experts also noted that the refrigerator could not have been left near the abandoned hut by accident. It had been dragged along the ground, with traces of the drag preserved in the soil under a layer of moss. A few meters away, they found rusty wire remnants and pieces of electrical tape that were probably used to fix the door before welding. This came as a shock to the lighthouse community. For years, Luke's name had been part of the local legend, the missing boy from North Creek. Now the legend has received a terrible confirmation. He was not taken by nature. He was bricked up alive. On the evening of July 30th, Sergeant Dawson officially reopened the case of the disappearance of Luke Miller. The dossier that had been gathering dust in the archive was back on her desk. And at the center of this dossier was a new piece of evidence: a photograph with a camouflage glove that, after 9 years of silence, reached out from the past, demanding an answer. After 9 years of silence, Sergeant Martha Dawson began with the very fragment that had been haunting her since day one. Luke's phone call to his best friend Ethan, a joyful shout in the background. "Hey, wait, where are you going?" And then the connection was suddenly cut off. At the time, in August 2015, it sounded like an accident. Now, after the refrigerator was found, it became a clue. Someone had been there for the boy. Dawson made a list of all of Luke's friends he had spent time with in high school. They were all adults now. Some moved away. Some had families. All of them agreed to be interviewed again. The sergeant recounted the events of that day, making everyone relive August 2015. First, she spoke to Ethan Price. He was a 17-year-old high school student then, now a 26-year-old broker in Portland, with a reputation for success and cold professionalism. His alibi 9 years ago looked shaky. Ethan claimed that after the call, he went for a drive around the city with a girl, but only his words could confirm this. The girl he had been dating had gone abroad and was not in touch. Dawson listened carefully to Ethan as he described the last conversation. "I remember that cry. It was sincere, like Luke had seen someone he'd known for a long time. It didn't sound like anxiety," he explained. However, Ethan's own behavior raised doubts. At school, he was always competitive with his friend, and teachers noted that Ethan was jealous of Luke's talent as a photographer. Several former classmates confirmed that there were conflicts between the boys. Luke won awards at local competitions, while Ethan remained in his shadow. Now he was successful in finance, but in the memory of many, he remained the one who could not accept someone else's success. Second on the list was a local recluse whom everyone called Grandpa Joe. In fact, he was in his early 60s and lived in an old trailer on the outskirts of the forest. Neighbors described him as a man of unsociable character, always armed and suspicious of anyone who came near his land. Back in 2015, Dawson noticed his old Dodge Ram pickup truck, which fit the general description of the vehicle that could be in the photo from the flash drive. But there was no direct evidence at the time. Joe said he was deer hunting that day. His story was not confirmed by anyone, but it was impossible to deny it either. Now it was impossible to resolve the matter definitively. 2 years ago, Joe died of a heart attack, and any possible evidence went with him. His trailer was demolished and his property sold off. The only thing left were the memories of his neighbors about his strange behavior and his reputation as a man not to be trusted. Dawson carefully checked the testimony. Luke's friends, one by one, rejected the idea that they could have been around that day. They all claimed that they had no chance to meet him in the woods. But the phrase, "Hey, stop," hung in the air like an echo coming back from the past. The sergeant recorded the details. Ethan had a motive, envy, and old conflicts. Joe had the opportunity. He lived near the forest, drove a suspicious pickup truck. One of them could have been the shadow in the last pictures. But will these hints be enough to prove his guilt? Each new leaf in the case opened up even more questions. If Ethan is guilty, why has he been behaving impeccably and building a career all these years? If Joe was guilty, why was there no trace of him near the refrigerator? And most importantly, was there a third person involved who was still in the dark? Dawson knew one thing. The story was just beginning. The past was coming to life, and anyone who had stood on the trail near North Creek 9 years ago could now be under suspicion. August 2024. A team of experts was working on the last photo from Luke Miller's camera in the Oregon State Police Crime Lab. The image was blurry, but modern processing algorithms made it possible to extract more than anyone had expected. The enlarged fragment clearly showed the shape of the radiator grille. The car belonged to the Dodge Ram series of the early 2000 years. It was a rare model, as most of these pickups had long since been decommissioned. Only a few dozen vehicles of this type were registered in the county database, and most of the owners were known to the police. The second discovery was a camouflage glove. A rectangular patch with an inscription was visible on its wrist. When the image was processed and several filters were applied, a familiar symbol became visible: the Oregon Forest Service patch. It was standard equipment for employees and volunteers who helped with the ranger units. Sergeant Martha Dawson immediately made a list of everyone who had participated in the search for Luke 9 years ago. The name that popped up among the first made her freeze: Bob Carter. Carter was known at Sweet Home as a reliable man. A former Forest Service employee, he remained active in the community after retirement, always helping with search operations and organizing volunteers. Then, in August 2015, he spent almost the entire week in the forest, personally combing the areas near the stream. For the townspeople, he was a hero. "Luke was like a son to me," he told reporters after the search was completed. This phrase was quoted in all the local newspapers. In those days, Carter seemed to be the personification of care and devotion. Dawson looked through old photos from the archive. In one of them, taken during the search operation, Bob Carter stood next to a group of volunteers, and he was wearing the same camouflage gloves with the Forest Service patch on his hands. The report stated, "Identified, early 2000s, Dodge Ram vehicle and glove with Oregon Forest Service patch." Both details match the profile of Bob Carter, a volunteer who was actively involved in the search in 2015. It was a breakthrough. For the first time in 9 years, the investigation had not only hypotheses, but also a specific name. But at the same time, this name was shocking. Carter was trusted and considered the moral fiber of the community. Everyone remembered how he carried posters with Luke's photo on his shoulders and urged people to join the search. The longer Dawson studied the materials, the more obvious it became. Someone who shouted for help the loudest could have become a torturer himself. A new note appeared in her notebook. "Carter is the main focus." But the detail in the photo itself remained eerie. The gloved hand stretched out to the lens now had a name that was still spoken with reverence. Sergeant Martha Dawson began checking all the data on Bob Carter. His record looked impeccable: a former Forest Service employee, a participant in numerous volunteer activities, a respected member of the local community. But as soon as she started digging deeper, disturbing details began to emerge in the archives. She found a record in the database of registration documents. Carter owned a Dodge Ram pickup truck made in 2002, the exact same model as the blurry photo from Luke's camera. He sold the truck in 2016, a year after the boy's disappearance. The new owner lived in a neighboring county, and the pickup had long since been written off. But the fact of the sale at that time looked too suspicious. Dawson went to Sweet Home to ask Carter's neighbors. They remembered the time well. One elderly woman recalled, "After the boy's disappearance, Bob walked around gloomy, but when asked, he always said that Luke was like a son to him. He almost cried in front of people." Another neighbor, on the contrary, remembered him as sharp. He used to curse at the youth, saying that today's children are weak, that they will not make men. One more thing came to light in the conversations. Bob's son, Matt Carter, was Luke's age. The boys went to the same school but rarely talked to each other. Unlike his father, Matt had a gentle disposition and was fond of art. He liked to take pictures with an old soapbox and dreamed of going to art college. Luke, who always carried a camera and won awards for his work, was his role model and a source of constant conflict in the family. The neighbors confirmed this. Bob did not approve of this hobby. He called photography an unmanly occupation, believing that his son should follow in his footsteps, joining the Forest Service and doing hard physical labor. When Matt spent time with Luke, his father would stage scenes for him at home. Dawson wrote it down in her notebook. Motive: father's jealousy. Luke personified what Bob did not accept in his own son. Talented, sensitive, artistic. The picture began to take shape. For the community, Carter was a savior who was looking for a missing boy. But this image could hide a deep hatred. The harsh man who had spent his life fighting with his own son saw Luke as a symbol of someone else's weakness that needed to be eradicated. In the archives of a local newspaper, Dawson found an interview with Bob, dated September 2015. He said, "We cannot allow young people to forget what discipline is. Only the strong survive in the forest." For an ordinary reader, this sounded like a call. For an experienced detective, it was a hidden confession of his own beliefs. In the evenings, Dawson looked over her notes. A photo from Luke's camera appeared before her eyes. A hand in a camouflage glove reaching for the lens. Everything pointed to the hand belonging to Bob Carter, a man the community held up as a role model. But the hardest part was coming to terms with the contrast. For 9 years, he referred to Luke as son. He carried his portraits at search rallies and told journalists about his great loss. At the same time, he was the one who could have locked the boy alive in an iron box. Dawson knew there was a direct confrontation ahead. She was preparing to meet the man who had been deceiving everyone for 9 years, playing the role of a philanthropist, a hypocrite who covered his crime with charity. At the end of August 2024, Sergeant Martha Dawson went to Bob Carter's house. His small cottage stood on the outskirts of Sweet Home, not far from the same road where Luke Miller had disappeared 9 years earlier. Carter met her on the porch with a mug of coffee and his usual smile. "It's been a while since you've been here, Sergeant. What is it now?" he asked calmly. Dawson replied that she wanted to clarify a few things about an old case. Carter eagerly invited her inside. Hunting trophies and yellowed photos from hiking trips hung in the living room, and certificates for volunteer work stood on the shelf. The atmosphere had to radiate respect and reliability, but that was exactly what was disturbing. Dawson started a conversation about August 2015, which volunteers had worked with him in the forest, which areas he had combed, whether he remembered the last time he had seen Luke. Carter answered confidently, even with a bit of irritation, saying how many times he could repeat the same thing. Then she pulled a printed photo from the boy's camera out of a folder, a blurry image of a hand in a camouflage glove with an Oregon Forest Service patch. The smile on his face instantly disappeared. "Did you have gloves like that, Bob?" Dawson asked quietly. "Maybe. Once upon a time. I don't remember," he muttered, looking away. The sergeant insisted that he show him his old gear. Carter, feigning indifference, agreed and led her to the garage. Among the old tools in a metal cabinet was a pair of worn camouflage gloves. There was a clear patch on the wrist, the same as in the photo. At that moment, he broke down. He sat down on a chair right in the middle of the garage, grabbed his head, and started talking. At first, he spoke in fragments, and then in more and more detail. He said that he had met Luke by chance that day near a stream. The guy was walking with a camera, as usual, and taking pictures of something. This caused him a wave of rage. He saw the teenager as a dangerous example for his son Meta, an example of weakness and dreaminess that needed to be pulled out by the roots. "I only wanted to scare him," he repeated. "I tied him up to show him that he was powerless. But when I realized that I had already gone too far, I couldn't let go. He would have told everything. And then Matt." Then he decided to get rid of the boy. An old refrigerator near an abandoned hut became a convenient solution for him. He dragged Luke in, welded the door shut, and left, convinced that no one would ever find this makeshift grave. The confession was recorded in a protocol. The next day, Carter was officially arrested for premeditated murder. The news instantly spread through the town. The man who had been considered a hero for 9 years turned out to be a torturer. After learning the truth, Matt Carter cut all ties with his father. For him, this blow was double. His faith in his hero father was destroyed, and at the same time he lost the man who inspired his own dreams, Luke Miller. The whole town gathered at Luke's funeral in early September. His camera was placed on the grave as a symbol, The guy lived for art and died holding the camera in his hands. Martha Dawson left the service a few months later and retired. She knew that justice had come late, but it had come, and the forests of Oregon remained green and majestic. But now their silence is different, a reminder that deadly poison can always be hidden behind calm facades.